So to tell us more about this, we joined via Zoom by AfriForum's campaign officer, Rerner. Thanks so much for your time. Welcome to Morning Live.
Good morning. Thank you for having me on.
So, Rerner, just to bring us up to speed, we know that court proceedings are currently underway between AfriForum and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation regarding that 50 million donation that was intended for Cuba. So, how did you now discover that the actual amount, as you say, is more in the region of 350 million rather than the 50 million in question?
Yes, just to give the viewers some context, our legal action consisted of two parts. In the first place, an urgent interdict to prevent the government from paying over any funds. And then the second part is a review application which needs to be heard at a later date. Our interdict succeeded on the 22nd of March, and therefore the government was prevented on an interim basis from donating the funds until the final review application is heard. And in our review application, for which we submitted our founding affidavit, we also then requested the court record for the decision to donate the funds to Cuba. And that is then, it was then attached to the court record, the fact that there was a contract between the ANC and Cuba for 350 million rand, also for aid. And but now, since then, it's also become clear that there's a question surrounding whether the 50 million is a part of the 350 million, or if it is in fact 400 million, which means that the 350 million has already been disbursed, and the 50 million is just an additional donation. So this is all just there's some question marks surrounding this.
Okay. So I'm assuming, as we said, this is a developing story still. So you are still doing investigation to establish the exact nature of this 350 million.
Yes, exactly. So we are still speaking to our lawyers, our legal team, and we are looking into what exactly is going on here. You know, but what we do know is that it's either 350 million rand or it's 400 million. So in both cases, it is simply unacceptable in the current economic climate. Also 10 years ago, our country wasn't in a good place, but certainly now, as a result of the government's mismanagement of the COVID-19 pandemic as well, there's no way of justifying this donation. The 50 million, or indeed the 350 million, or indeed the 400 million, it's very insulting to the citizens of this country that are suffering as a result of mismanagement, but also corruption.
Well, in addition to defending the court action, government has come out very strongly, Rerner, in stating its case in this regard. They've come out to say this is not a cash donation. This would be a donation in kind of a humanitarian aid to Cuba. So when it comes to AfriForum's objection, is it a principal matter, or is it, as some pundits have accused you, of just taking cheap shots after reading the room and realizing that South Africans are in general perhaps hurtful with the government?
No, it's a matter of principle. One can never deal in absolutes. So obviously, you cannot say that any form of humanitarian aid should not be legal. But in this specific case pertaining to Cuba, it has to be said that South Africa is higher on the global hunger index than Cuba. What that means is that hunger and food insecurity is a bigger problem in this country than it is in Cuba. And that's why we find this donation in this specific case extremely insulting. What we also have to take into account is that the government, like you mentioned, said that the funds are, or that it will be services or goods, and it won't be physical money, but those goods or services still have a monetary value. So they still need to adhere to the same laws as if it would be a normal monetary donation. So it doesn't help the government at all that it will be goods and services. They still have to follow the same processes, and it's still the donation still has a monetary value.
So just to establish, as I asked previously whether this was a principal objection, is this an objection to Cuba specifically receiving a donation from South Africa, or would this be your stance on any other country in the world receiving any sort of humanitarian aid or donation from South Africa?
Yes, like I mentioned, we don't deal in absolutes. So we are objecting to this specific donation to Cuba. We now see that there's a longer history of aid that was sent to Cuba. We know that there's a very, very strong relationship between the ANC and Cuba. But if the ANC wants to, let's say, donate money to Cuba, why doesn't it create its own organization to get the funds and on a private basis? But what it cannot do is it cannot use taxpayers' money to uphold its ideological bonds with Cuba. So we are objecting to this specific donation to a country which is in a better financial position than South Africa. In fact, we should be asking ourselves, why isn't Cuba donating the money to us? Because like I mentioned, food insecurity is a much bigger problem in this country than it is in Cuba.
So the objection is to the relationship essentially between the African National Congress, that is the ruling party, and Cuba, who were obviously, a very much a pivotal part of supporting South Africa's liberation struggle.
No, I think that is not the correct way of wording it. Our objection is against the principle of donating money to a country which is in a much better financial position than South Africa is. I was just adding the bonds between the ANC and Cuba to make my point, but our objection is against the principle that we cannot be squandering much needed taxpayers' money to uphold bonds between South Africa and Cuba, and at the end of the day, that money could be used to the benefit of the people in this country, and it could be used to solve the myriad of problems we have in this very country.
Now, I'm just quickly running through the GDP comparisons for South Africa and Cuba, but I'm sure you've made the point, so you know what those are. So what is Cuba's position in comparison to that of South Africa?
Well, I have to say that due to the Cuban government's policy over the last almost 100 years, or at least a couple of decades, also under Castro's rule, they aren't in a very good position. That has to be said. But again, I'm using the Global Hunger Index, which is a very, 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 very good way of measuring these things. It's the world's leading way. And according to the Global Hunger Index, hunger and food insecurity, those specific things for which the humanitarian aid is being requested, are a bigger problem in South Africa than it is in Cuba. So again, this is no way of justifying this donation, and it's simply irrational, illegal. And we also believe that the correct parliamentary oversight also hasn't taken place. So this donation is illegal in a number of different ways.
Well, we are going to leave it there, as we say, for now. Cuba versus South Africa in terms of GDP 5 years average growth on GDP per capita. South Africa, Cuba 151st versus 130th, and 95th and 82nd respectively is how they rank. But I guess that is a conversation all in its own that needs to be dissected timelessly. But for now, as we said, a developing story, so thanks for your time. Rerner Duvenage from AfriForum, and talking to us there about what they say is actually much more than the initial 50 million rand donation that they are currently wrangling with DIRCO over in court, and that it seems as though there might be more to the tune of around 350 million rand in the humanitarian aid given to Cuba. It could go up to 400 million rand. They're still trying to figure that out. So we'll park that there for the moment.